Today's episode is for my chronic swellers. So the classic, ACL injury, and we're 6 months post-op, and we're still struggling with a lot of fluid in our knee, or my chronic ankle rollers who kind of always have some fluid in their ankle, my chronic swellers. In a way, I'm also talking to you if you're in that immediate post-injury phase or post-operation phase when we expect swelling to happen too. Everything I'm going to talk about today applies to you, but I really wanted to zone in for people that struggle with this long term. I've seen this time and time again, that extra fluid, not only is it super frustrating, but from a physical therapy standpoint, sometimes it can slow things down. It can really lengthen this process for you, and none of us want that. So, can nutrition play a role in helping with that? That's what we're going to figure out. Today, I'm also going to invite you to become a scientific observer of your own body. And what that means is I'll give you a checklist of things that may or may not be contributing to this swelling. And I'm going to give you some examples of how you can try something different or observe something different. And then you choose what works for you, what feels best within your body. We're going to do little experiments, and kind of sometimes the silver lining of a long-term injury recovery is you get the opportunity to learn a lot about your body. Everybody's recovery is different, and you have to become that scientific observer of what works for you and what maybe doesn't make a difference or what really doesn't work. Sometimes with my one-on-one clients, I call this a strategy charcuterie board. So basically, just imagine I'm giving you a plate of options and you can pick and choose the ones that you like. If you're new here, my name is Emily Barnhart. I'm the Injury RD. I help athletes through an injury figure out what to eat and how to eat. Plus, I'm not going to talk about it here today, but I like to get deep on the emotional side of injury and how that relates to food, and whether you're scared to eat certain things or scared of how your body might change. And I can help you feel more confident in your food choices and more confident in your body right now. Now, let me be super clear here, right? I'm going to give you your charcuterie board. I'm going to give you your charcuterie board of choices, but this is always in conjunction with your physical therapy. You're going to get a charcuterie board from physical therapy as well. You might get options from your strength and conditioning coach. There's also maybe mental skills or sports psychology that needs to come into play here. This always works best as a team, right? Nutrition is pretty cool, obviously, but I like to think of it as part of like the Avengers, right? Physical therapy is maybe Iron Man. Strength and conditioning is obviously the Hulk. Nutrition can be Wonder Woman. I don't know. Maybe we're Thor. Mental skills is Spider Man. I don't know. I'm actually not super versed in that world, but you get the idea. These strategies that I'm going to talk about here alone, they're to support what you're doing in physical therapy. They're there to support what you're doing in the weight room. Today, I'm going to give you that checklist and some observations. I'm going to give you some examples. And then basically your charcuterie board is going to be anti-inflammatory fats, antioxidant options. We're going to talk about the salt question and whether that's something you should be concerned about. We're going to kind of talk about some micronutrients, and then we're going to talk a little bit about Mother Nature. And you'll see what I mean. Alrighty, so here's your checklist. Number one, this will always be number one related to an injury, regardless of if we're talking about swelling, if we're talking about any stage. Number one, are you eating enough calories, enough protein, enough carbs, enough fats? Are you drinking enough water? We have to be getting enough to be moving forward the way that we want to move forward. And if you don't know the answer to that, there are definitely other videos and things that I can direct you to in the show notes. But then number two, if we're talking about fighting all of that inflammation, we're going to look at antioxidants and anti-inflammatory fats. And a simple way that I think about this is something that I call the 5 per day goal. And that is kind of self-explanatory. Are you getting 5 antioxidants or anti-inflammatory fats per day? That is basically any fruit or vegetable, an omega-3 supplement I count as one of those 5, or any of those healthy fats that we think about, omega-3s, fish, especially salmon and tuna, avocado, chia, walnuts. That 5 per day goal is something that is totally possible to do, but for a lot of people, it does require a little bit of thought. But for example, let's say you have oatmeal for breakfast every day. Maybe we're going to sprinkle some walnuts on top of that or some chia on top of that. And we're going to have a banana. And we're just going to buff out that oatmeal a little bit. That's already 2 of the 5. Let's say you're going to have a smoothie in the morning. That can be a really easy way to throw in some spinach or throw in some fruit. Or I would even count orange juice towards this goal, or I would count applesauce towards this goal. I'm going to count those in the fruit category. So maybe we're getting 1 or 2 at breakfast. Maybe you take a fish oil supplement. That counts as well. Then maybe at lunch, we are making sure that we're having veggies on our sandwich, or again, we're putting avocado or hummus on that sandwich. Or then maybe for your afternoon snack, you like to have guacamole and some chips. And fun tip for you, pomegranate seeds, one, are a great antioxidant and are so good in guacamole. So think about adding some pomegranate seeds to your guacamole. And then maybe for dinner, you're going to have some salmon and a side of veg, broccoli, whatever you want it to be. And there we go, right? If we're including fruits and veg at most meals and we sprinkle some healthy fats in there, we can very easily, hopefully, hit that 5 per day goal. If you are someone that struggles with this, especially struggles with the veggie sides of things, I have lots of tricks up my sleeve on how to hide veggies. So I would encourage you to reach out with, send me like maybe 2 of the meals that you feel you eat most often, and I bet I can come up with a way to hide some veggies in there. Now, the 5 per day goal is kind of the basic checklist. It's where I start. It's kind of where most people stop. It's like, okay, I can do that. And we don't want to put that much thought into our nutrition. I know some of you will want to go beyond the 5 per day goal. This is where we get into some research. So if that is not for you, skip forward probably like 5 minutes. But the thing is, when we're talking about research in this population, is it doesn't really exist. Like healthy, young athletes and looking at how this can help with specific injuries, we kind of have to find some other populations that have a bigger database and use our best judgment. So if we're looking at excess synovial fluid, we're looking at extra fluid in the joint. Sometimes we can look at the arthritis world, and yes, this is an older population. There's some key things that we need to think about in applying this research to us. But there was one paper that had a really good review of all of these different types of antioxidants and how that specifically was acting on excess synovial fluid, on this, joint swelling in an arthritis population, which is that chronic inflammatory state. And it listed all sorts of strategies that had somewhat positive outcomes, either on pain, on the swelling itself and the size of that joint, or the function. One, I want to highlight what those specifically are, but I want to highlight the amount. So some that had positive outcomes were a research trial that participants were drinking 6 cups of green tea per day. So that doesn't seem doable for most people, but what that tells me is like, okay, maybe we want to include green tea. Sometimes I might be doing a little something, something. There was another one that they did 50 grams per day of strawberries, which is about a third a cup of strawberries. And that one seems pretty doable. I like that one. There was another one that had 500 milligrams per day of bromelain, which is an enzyme that's found in pineapple. And if I am understanding this correctly, that is the equivalent of eating like 15 pineapples. And then even when I went and looked at the supplement form of bromelain, it's not 500 milligrams per day. So bromelain may be great, but that is not a antioxidant pill I would lean towards out of all my options. There was another one that had 2 grams per day of cinnamon. That's basically a tablespoon of cinnamon. Again, maybe if you're an oatmeal in the morning person and you want to add apples and cinnamon to it. That might be something to consider. Most of you have probably heard of curcumin or turmeric research. I am going to skip all of that research for now. There recently has been some, as of what month are we? As of August 2024, there has been some kind of fraud and stuff coming out on that research, and I'm going to dive deeper into that in a different video. Most of you have probably also heard of ginger. There was a positive study, again, in arthritis patients with 25 milligrams of ginger. That is basically like 4.5 tablespoons, which would be quite a lot. Another one had 500 milligrams per ginger, which is crazy. One had positive results with basically a guava per day. One had a mango per day. One had a pomegranate per day. So now we're just looking into a singular whole fruit, which is great. I love that we're getting it from whole fruit and not a supplement form. Another popular antioxidant that you'll see a lot is resveratrol. This is where the red wine is good for you thought process comes from. This did show positive results at 1 gram per day. I popped open 3 supplement brands on the internet just to look at their dosage to see if we're getting close to a gram of resveratrol a day. And 2 of them had 0.1 grams, so 10% of what we're looking for. One of them had half a gram, Momentous, which is a nice brand. You could potentially take 2, but unfortunately, I'm going to pop the illusion that a glass of red wine is potentially going to help your swelling. It's probably actually going to hurt. Sorry. Long story short, basically on the antioxidant side, I would think about getting it from real foods. I would specifically look at berries and cherries. A tart cherry drink is something that I'm not going to get into in this video, but is a great antioxidant. That could be a great strategy for your charcuterie board. If you are someone that adding a tablespoon of cinnamon is a lot, adding half a tablespoon of cinnamon to your oatmeal in the morning feels good, then maybe that's a strategy that you try. If you like adding ginger to your smoothies and you can go for like a full tablespoon, then I think that could be a strategy to try. But as far as the kind of antioxidant pill forms, I don't know. I'm not really sold on any of them. Potentially tart cherry comes in a pill form. There is joint and muscle pill from Klean that I can link in the show notes that I have anecdotally heard a lot of athletes say that they do feel a difference when they take it. Their knees feel better. But I'm kind of going to encourage the whole foods route on this one as well. Berries and cherries. And then when we lean over to the anti-inflammatory fats, let's talk about omega-3s, because omega-3 is 1000% a supplement that I recommend to pretty much every single person in any single stage of life, in any single stage of injury. There's one exception sometimes that some surgeons really don't like you to take an omega-3 supplement prior to your surgery. That's fine. Listen to them. But personally, I think every single person should take an omega-3 supplement. There is a crap ton of beneficial research coming out of omega-3s for your brain, for your heart, for your muscle, for your swelling. But again, if we want to try to find a super applicable research paper, we have to look into some other populations. There is one study I found that was looking at, I believe it was ACL. Just keep in mind when we're looking at this study, it was ages like 14 to 50. And, between the control group and the regular group, they had, kind of really evened out these two options. But there were lots of genders, lots of ages, lots of different surgery types. You can get different types of grafts. So there's a little too many variables for my liking. But the study was feeding 4.2 grams of ALA, which is a type of omega-3 fatty acid. And 4.2 grams is high. It's probably about 4 times higher than what you're going to see on the shelves in a supplement usually, but It's not a dose that scares me, to be honest. It's not that different from what we see in some concussion research and things like that. So they had a control group that was getting this, 4.2 grams of omega 3 and just kind of a regular placebo group. They encouraged them to take it for 2 full years. And they were comparing IKDC scores, which is something that I wasn't familiar with. It's an International Knee Documentation Committee score. It's composed of 18 items, basically 18 questions, and it has them rank how they're doing from positive to negative, and then it gives you a score out of 100. And what I thought was really interesting is the conclusion of the study is saying like, oh yeah, the fish oil is better because these IKDC scores were significantly better in the group that was taking the fish oil consistently for 2 years, but there was no significant difference in pain, in quality of life, in symptoms, or in satisfaction with treatment. There was a significant difference, and it was showing up in that IKDC in their return to sport level before injury, meaning if they were playing at a specific level, then got hurt, they were more likely to come back and play at that level or better again. And then there was a significant difference between the two groups with, they called it occurrence of giving way, so that knee instability, where the fish oil group had a lower incidence of that giving away. I don't know. I thought it was interesting. It's hard to determine that research conclusively. I would love to have seen what it looked like, at month 3, at month 6, at 1 year, before that 2-year follow up to see if there was a difference. That being said, like, I'm going to recommend an omega 3 anyways. And this is just maybe an interesting anecdote to add on top of that. Basically, all of that to say, I want you to take a fish oil. I think it can be beneficial in managing this inflammation, managing that swelling. I personally would like to see it at a dose of at least 400 milligrams of DHA and 300, 400 plus of EPA. Those are the specific types of omega 3s that you'll see on the back of your supplement. So most of the time, if you look at that label, you'll see an EPA, a DHA, sometimes an ALA, and sometimes, other, just other. DHA is the one that really impacts your brain. This study, which I actually is part of why I wanted to include it and found it interesting, is that it was ALA. And ALA sometimes I feel like is the ugly stepchild of an omega 3 supplement. We always talk about EPA and DHA as the gold standards. Those are the ones that you're going to find in fish. And maybe there is something to be said about ALA as an option in this population. I don't freaking know. Maybe they went with ALA because it was a cheaper option. Either way, I liked that they had ALA showing some kind of benefit, whether we want to see these as we cannot see these as conclusive results, but I found it interesting. And I will link in the show notes some omega 3 options that I trust, that I recommend often, that I'm not affiliated with, that I think I 100% will recommend. Okay, moving on to the next part of our charcuterie board. Moving on to the next part of our charcuterie board, our list of options that you might want to think about. And this is, again, remember in the beginning I said I want you to think like a scientist. I want you to start making some observations to learn more about you. This is really where we get into that. Let's talk about the salt question. And yes, I think there is merit to this for some people, not everyone. This is a variable that I have seen make a difference for some people and nothing for others. And then the other really, really important thing to remember when we're talking about salt is foods that tend to be really big culprits, foods that tend to be high in salt are, frozen food, fast food, prepared meals, deli meats, jerky, a lot of on the go things. And those are foods that are really easy for injured athletes to have access to. And again, I mentioned in the beginning, I personally care more about you hitting your calorie goal, hitting your protein goal than this salt question. And I'm going to come back to this in the end about, okay, well, then maybe there's certain times where we watch our salt intake. But for my medical providers, I just want you to keep that in mind, that we need to be realistic about the whole picture here. Yes, salt intake might be influencing the fact that again, I keep referring to knees because I see so many ACLs, but the fact that the joint is retaining water in a way that we don't want. But what does the life of the athlete look like? Can we go beyond the recommendation for them to watch their salt intake and provide some options that are just as convenient, just as easy for them, and also lower in salt? And that can be tricky sometimes. The recommendation when you are trying to watch your salt intake is to try to have less than like 500 milligrams per meal. Go to the Trader Joe's frozen section and it will be a challenge to find that. Plus, again, consider a lot of our athletes are large humans with a lot of muscle mass that need more food than the average person. Even during injury, less than 500 milligrams for a serving size that they need is tricky. Obviously, or maybe not obviously, the solution is usually to cook more meals at home and to go with more homemade options. And again, that's just really hard to access for a lot of people. But maybe we take it in baby steps. Maybe we don't drink Gatorade or even Gatorade Zero throughout the day. Maybe we're finding a different snack than beef jerky or finding a different lunch than a deli sandwich. The other half of this question, and this whole episode is a response to a specific question I got in my newsletter that asked about salt and also said, should I avoid pork? And this, again, is a really interesting one because we can really go down a rabbit hole here. It looks like some people are sensitive to histamine, which is in high amounts in pork. It's also in high amounts in wine and beer. That's why I kind of muttered earlier that your glass of wine is likely, for multiple reasons, not helping your swelling. Histamine is also high in processed meat, cheeses, sauerkraut, canned fish, things like that. But then there are also certain fruits and vegetables that are not themselves high in histamine, but they can trigger a histamine response. And what I mean talking about a histamine response, is it's triggering that inflammatory response. It's triggering that big cascade of inflammation when we don't want it, or to be honest, when we don't need it. And personally, right now, I don't want to go down this rabbit hole, especially about all the fruits and vegetables that can potentially trigger a histamine response. I think there are other things on this list that we're going through that can be a better place to start. But if you are really struggling with swelling, if you are really struggling with this inflammatory response, then let's start by maybe cutting out the foods that are high in histamine. So the pork, the cheese, the sauerkraut, the things like that. And if it is still something, then maybe it's time to go down that rabbit hole and try to cut out or limit or at least decrease portion of some of those fruits and vegetables that can trigger a histamine response. The next thing that I want you to think about that's going to affect some people and definitely not others. I know for a fact some of you watching it, this will not affect you. This is where we talk about Mother Nature. This is where we talk about the menstrual cycle. And again, this is where I ask you to be an observer of your own body, because that's obviously when you're going to see patterns if you are in this cycle. So if you start to track your swelling, and we're going to talk about how to do that at the end of this video, if you start to track your menstrual symptoms in general, even if you are taking an oral contraceptive or you have some sort of birth control that is impacting your hormones, even if you are blocking the normal, or I guess natural cycle of your menstrual cycle, I do think it's worth tracking your symptoms just for your own sake. I mean, unrelated to swelling, you just then kind of get the power to know sometimes what might be coming. I can call myself out here and say that tracking helped me realize that on the dot, 3 days before my period comes, I'm going to have a really sad day. I'm going to feel really bad about myself. I'm probably going to cry about something. I'm just going to feel really down in the dumps. And that's fine. But now I also kind of know it's coming. When I wake up and I put my clothes on in the morning and I'm like, oh my gosh, I look terrible. I feel terrible, blah, blah, blah. I can just be like, today's the day. And I'm prepared for it. Anyways, let's get back on topic. So changes in progesterone and estrogen, typically the day that your flow is starting will cause the body to retain more water and salt. If you are tracking those symptoms, do you notice that during your period, maybe you're feeling a little bit more bloated, maybe you are retaining a little bit more water in that joint, maybe you do have a little bit more swelling. And then on kind of the other half of it, when you are ovulating, when you're in the middle of your cycle, you see that maybe we have a decrease in that swelling. And so you kind of almost like a rising and falling tide throughout the month of your swelling. And then if we learn that pattern, all of the other things that we've talked about in this video during your period, do we want to implement those strategies? So maybe, if you're going to make I don't know, a drink with green tea and ginger and whatever that would be kind of a pain in the butt to drink every day, maybe now it becomes more manageable to be like, yeah, I'm going to put the effort in towards that for 5 days of the month, for 6 days of the month. Or you really want to hit your 5 per day goal during your bleeding phase to help manage the water retention that's happening during that phase. So again, this is why it's so individualized. And so, I'm giving you options so you can try things out and see what works for you. And then last but not least, I want to talk about some micronutrient green checks. And I hesitate to even bring this up because anytime I talk about a specific micronutrient, so like magnesium or zinc, people will be like, oh, okay, I'll just go supplement with it. And there is such thing as too much of a good thing sometimes, especially when we talk about things like zinc. If we're getting too much zinc, then we're potentially blocking other things, and that's not good for us either. So I really want to emphasize that, this is the end of the list for a reason. I think it would be really rare to see this, and I just want you to make sure that you're getting this through food. Something that we typically see and is talked about a lot in older adults is inflammation caused from zinc. So your zinc metabolism, your ability to kind of absorb and use zinc, decreases as you get older. And I don't mean like 35, I mean like 70, 80. We see a zinc deficiency lead to some kind of chronic inflammation in that population. If you are under the age of 50, I am not worried about this. It is really rare, to be honest. It's really rare to see a zinc deficiency in a healthy young adult. And here's your green check. If you eat meat, if you eat dairy, you're probably fine. If you are a vegan, I want you to make sure that you're getting your zinc maybe from fortified cereals, maybe from pumpkin seeds, from beans, from lentils. As long as you're getting those things, you're probably fine. But I just want you to double check that it's in your diet. Magnesium potentially falls into the same category. Majority of Americans are maybe not eating enough magnesium. If I was being really, really diligent, you can do blood work to check magnesium status. So, like, let's say we are deep in the struggle with this inflammatory response. It has been months and we have tried things and we are just stuck. Maybe the next time you get blood work from your doctor, I would probably ask for a red blood cell magnesium to see what that status looks like. Okay, now we get to the fun part where, I've mentioned it over and over again, we are becoming scientific observers of our own body. So let's now actually create some data so that you can zoom out and look at the big picture. One thing you can do is actually measure the same part of your joint and write that down. So you can, you can either get a measuring tape, like a cloth one. You can use a piece of string and just notice like if it's the same all the time or if it's not fitting or if it's overlapping at times. And it doesn't have to be exact. It just gives you an idea of where your normal is and again, how you're fluctuating. Let me say, if you are going to measure, let's do it with a little bit of accuracy and purpose. Let's say I'm measuring my knee. I'm going to find a landmark on my knee that doesn't change and make sure I always measure there. So let's say it's like, well, let me like kind of look at my knee for a second, right? Let's say I'm going to, you can feel your patellar bone. Maybe I'm always going to find the bottom of that or the top of that. And that's my circumference of where I'm going to go. Or if you're on the sides of your knees, you can kind of feel where there's bone and there's not really a lot of tissue over that. So maybe I'm going to find those bones on the sides of my knees, and I'm always going to make sure my tape or my measurement is going to go around there. If you don't want to be that scientific, then you can kind of make up a scale of 1 to 10. Today, my knee feels 10 out of 10 swollen, and write it on a calendar somewhere. And then at the end of the month, you kind of look back, or the end of 3 months or whatever time period, you can be like, oh yeah, I'm fluctuating from like a 2 to a 7 and I'm seeing that menstrual pattern, or I'm seeing whatever pattern, or I notice that every time I go for a run, I'm going to be swollen for about 2 days following. Things like that. Again, it'll be unique to you. You can also make little notes on there based on some of the things that we have talked about. So let's say that you do have kind of like a calendar where you're marking down whatever unit you have decided to use. And we also want to see how that lines up with like eating fast food or eating prepared meals or frozen foods. And we're trying to look at salt. Make, little marks so you can see when I zoom out what's the big pattern. Or how does it line up with your supplements? Maybe for a month, you are going to try tart cherry juice every day, and we can compare 1 month to the other. This is not by any means perfect science, but it is a way for you to observe. Maybe you're going to mark on your calendar when you're going to focus on your 5 per day goal, or when you're going to take your omega-3 and you notice swelling happening like on that day or kind of the day after, the following day. Or does it not make a difference for you? And I know that being injured really sucks, but a silver lining that I hear a lot of athletes say is that injuries are such a great opportunity to observe and to really, really get to know and understand your body and learn what makes you feel best. Another thing that I want to mention too is you could even kind of line up this data with things like mood. So, scale of 1 to 10, how frustrated are you day to day? How confident or anxious or insecure or whatever are you feeling? Things like that can give us some insight into how our mind can kind of play tricks during this process. So, great example, right? Let's say you are physically measuring your knee, and before you do that, you're giving yourself a scale of 1 to 10, right? So I wake up in the morning, or actually probably do this at the end of the day, right? So after dinner, every day, every other day, whatever works for you, I think, okay, scale of 1 to 10, I was probably an 8 today. And then I'm going to go physically get the tape and I'm going to see what my number is or where I am on my piece of string or whatever. And it's actually same as yesterday when I said I was feeling a 5 out of 10. So sometimes everything else that's going on can cause us to feel like, oh my God, this is terrible and it's never going to get better and whatever. But then when you get to zoom out and look at the actual numbers, it's like, okay, it's actually pretty consistent. In conclusion, we are finally here. In a perfect world, for my either immediately post-op athletes or just got injured and are managing that swelling, or for my chronic swelling athletes, I would do the following. I would have some sort of data gathering. And usually, when I work with an athlete, especially one on one, we kind of come up with what makes sense together based on what goals are, based on what the main struggles are. And that kind of looks different for everybody. But there would be some sort of data gathering. And I love to see it along with a food log or at least pictures sometimes of what you're eating or notes, whatever way doesn't feel overwhelming to you, so that we can easily compare what we ate versus symptoms. I would potentially want blood work done. If I'm being like, again, perfect world, being super diligent, I would potentially want blood work done on vitamin D status and magnesium. And then I would recommend the following. We're potentially, there are ways you can look at your omega 3 status as well. So we could potentially do that blood work also. And then I would definitely recommend a daily omega 3 supplement. I would probably recommend a daily polyphenol, a daily antioxidant. Again, that Klean joint and muscle is one that a lot of athletes really like. Or King Orchard has a tart cherry pill that is pretty similar that I've seen used before. I would probably try to help the athlete get into some sort of daily habit that's including one of the things that we talked about. So whether it's a daily smoothie or a daily drink mixture that is just kind of helping us hit one or two of those 5 per day. So fruit, veg, or anti-inflammatory fat. That could be, maybe something that's like a green tea base, and we're putting some ginger and maybe like some pineapple juice to like sweeten it up, and they just carry that with them throughout the day. Maybe it's like a strawberry banana smoothie. Maybe it's like a pineapple mango ginger smoothie. Maybe I've done this one before that actually was a big hit. A berry pie, so it's like berries and cinnamon. And again, this is helpful to get other things in as well, right? We're obviously going to put some protein powder in, so it's going to help us get towards that goal. It can be easy and convenient. If you're salt sensitive, it's pretty easy to make a smoothie that's low in salt, that kind of stuff. So I would come up with a strategy for the athlete. If that sounds like something that you want to do and you want some oversight on it, I would encourage you to think about working with me in the Ready to Return program. That is linked in the show notes. And in general, if you want to continue to learn more about how to fuel during your rehab, you want to feel confident in your body during this time, make sure that you are subscribed here, subscribe to the newsletter so that you never miss a thing. Happy fueling. I hope maybe you can get that swelling down. And if you have made it this far, share in the comments what your biggest takeaway from this video was or what your biggest question is so that we can all continue learning together.